So the first thing I want to show is custom cutter collection support. So here we have a collection of cutters. This is normally where we put all the cutters that are created whenever you're using our tools. However, let's right click and create a new collection, and we'll call this example, and we'll press Ctrl D, and instead of our cutter collection being cutters, we're going to just click on the X and change that to example. And now I can show you that if you start with box and you draw a shape, it will now be placed in a correct collection. If you draw a circle, it too will be placed in a correct collection. Same with Ngon, in addition to custom, all being placed in the collection that's being specified in your Ctrl D mini helper. So this was something that was only supporting custom as of the last release, but now you can see that it's been expanded to now support all shapes inside of Boxcutter. So in the event that you're wanting to work with a custom collection, it's now easier than ever. So here we are in Blender 2.83.10 using Boxcutter 717.11, our previous version. And right now I'm already inside of line box, which can be jumped to from box by just clicking the quick toggle on the top bar. And inside of line box there's an issue exposed where if you drew a box but you were to press J, it would force a flip. And this flip is actually there in order to make text work better with Boxcutter, because it's so easy for us to flip the text accidentally when correcting these matrices and these transformation jumps. But just letting you know that this flip that was happening with line box has been fixed and is no longer a thing. So we can actually minimize this version of Blender, and we'll click the same little quick tick to jump over to line box. And here we are drawing our line box, and if we press J, we see that it is no longer flipping, allowing you to get in and perform the operation just as you intended. So here we are in 2.83 using the previous version of Boxcutter 717.11. And if we press D and switch over to Ngon, the way that you normally use Ngon is you would click and drag to create your line, and then after releasing, from there you can just hover and click to add additional points. And this is basically how you would use Ngon. And then double clicking the last point, you can begin performing the extrusion process, where you can then tab and just drag the bevel dot in order to begin adding bevels to this. So that is the specific way that's able to be used, but the key thing is that you click and drag in order to start Ngon. In this version there was an issue where in our attempts to actually make Ngon faster, we removed some of the training wheels that was in place for users who mishandled Ngon. So if you were the type of person who control, click, 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 and then attempt to extrude, pause, and perform a bevel, you would actually run into issues. And that's because you're not supposed to click on the first point. You're supposed to drag at the first point and then click on subsequent points. And so as a result, if we shift this to live, we can actually go in edit mode and see that there's a double at the very first point that we need to remove. And once we remove that, we now are able to bevel this as we wanted to begin with. But if you have doubles, of course the shape isn't going to be able to bevel unless the points are far enough apart for you to perform the bevel. So if we press H and just hide that shape, we can actually minimize this Blender and jump to the next one. And basically in this update we've made it where if you hold Control and you click and click and click, there should be a system in place to ensure that if you pause it and perform the bevel, that we will attempt to remove those points for you. Of course this doesn't work in every case, and this still isn't the way that we recommend using Ngon. But if you are using Ngon this way, just know that we've doubled back and done some fixes to make it even easier for you. However, me personally, I like to have Ngon perma-snap on, releasing the need for me to have to hold Control to begin it. In fact, the behavior of actually holding down Control to perform a draw is something that's kind of a throwback to our 2.79 days. But just letting you know, if you're having issues with the bevel, more than likely you may be experiencing something with doubles happening on the mesh, in which case our latest update 717.12 attempts to rectify that. So for this particular example, we'll take the cube, press Q, and use HardOps in order to quickly put a bevel on it. From here I'm just going to press D and switch over to custom. And with custom, we're just going to draw a Boxcutter logo in the center. And because we have no shape selected, that's why we're drawing the logo. And if we draw the shape and we shift to live, we have our shape. And we can select the bevel and of course lower the bevel to try to get it more reasonable. But because of the edge work that's happening inside of the logo, the bevel isn't actually working out as good as it could be. In fact, one way to improve the way the Boxcutter logo shows up in a bevel is we can go under Mesh Tools and Dice, and we'll just hit it with a dice of 1, which will give us this single support edge. And we could just go in and actually remove all of these diagonal edges. Maybe not that one seemed important. But after removing these diagonal edges, now we actually have a mesh result that looks a lot better. So of course, after putting a weighted normal on it, we can now bring this bevel in. In fact, this edge also needs to go along with this edge, and we get an even better result. And so sometimes I'll put the Boxcutter logo on a piece of my work and then go in and work the logo in order to get a fine bevel result like this, where we don't have any cross edges forcing the flow to go bad. And this is something that always drove me crazy about Boxcutter, so I'm happy to announce that in the latest version of Boxcutter 717.12, this has been resolved. So if we go ahead and draw a bevel, we can just go under custom, and we'll do the same thing where we create our logo, except it appears I'm still in draw line, so we'll just spawn it out in a very strange way and bring our shape back. And let's actually rotate our logo because we're not in distress. And then we'll just shift it to live so we can talk about it. And I'm just going to lower the bevel width amount a bit. And if we look at this, we can see that now there's an edge going directly down this, and there's no longer any perpendicular edges to make the logo come out looking terrible whenever you put it in a beveled surface. So, you know, for a series of guys who are all about the bevel and booleans, it just seemed appropriate that our logo also was able to boolean into beveled surfaces appropriately. There's this workflow that I envision in Boxcutter that'll be possible someday, and slowly we've been working towards it. But to show a glimpse of what that is, you know, I want to be able to draw a cut, of course, perform cuts as I often do, just work in area, just adding in detail, performing box cuts and bevels, you know, the usual 9 to 5 work that I often do, just working a surface, just getting the cuts just right. And then from here, I want to perform a cut, press Y to change it to an extraction, and we've extracted this. If we were to jump over to collection 2, we see that there is an extraction, but we jump back to layer 1, and the moment that we perform a cut, inside of our outliner, we've now created another extraction called extraction.001. And this is strange. There's nothing really wrong with that because it's how our system was built, but it's always something that I personally had something against because I don't want to basically call cutters extractions. I only want extractions to be called extractions. And what this means is that, let's say that we wanted to go in our cutters collection and begin dealing with our extractions. Well, we could press 2 and jump over to our cutters, and if we enable extractions, we see that all of our extractions are basically not the extractions that we want. This one's the extraction we want, but these two are just extractions based off the naming of the extraction itself, and I've always found this to be kind of redundant. And so this update, we've sought to do something about this as well. And what I mean by this is that we go inside the latest Blender and we perform the same thing, and it appears that I'm really just line boxing it today. So, you know, if that's fine, we can rock with that. We'll just perform a few bevels, a couple of cuts here, draw a line box at this angle, which is why line box was born. Just a couple of itty bitty little line boxes for our box cut committee. So now we can draw our box, and if we press Y, we can perform an extraction. So just like before, we now have our extraction in the outliner. And what this means is that now we can draw our custom shape, still in draw line. Just my day for draw line, I guess. If you want to turn that off, you can always just press Control D and just turn off draw line, and you'll begin drawing custom in the usual box system that's there. But we can see that now as I begin using extractions as custom cutters, they're no longer being named after the extraction. They're now just being called cutters, and this is because there's now a case in place to replace the names of extractions so that they're not being reused in names. And this will allow users to work, gather extractions, and have extractions only be the areas that they designate as extractions, meaning they were taken by our tool, the extractor. So here I am drawing another area, and we will just perform our cut and just grab just this area. We'll press Y to extract, and now we have our extraction. If we jump over to collection 2, we can now enable extraction 0, and we can enable extraction 1, and we see that we now have 2 extractions we can begin using for whatever our needs are. Usually I get them placed correctly with our origin, and then from there export them to KitOps for reuse. But just letting you know that we aim to make it a little bit cleaner when dealing with cutters and their collections in the future, and especially finding those precious extractions, because sometimes you'll extract an area and it will just work out so well that it's just worthy of a reuse. And that is something that we aim to have with our tools as well, is that the users should be able to quickly find the extractions that they took and recall them and store them and bring them back. So I mean, it's part of a larger plan that still is being worked on, but over time I hope that it all comes to fruition and users will be able to store and recall their favorite extractions across multiple files, storing packs and so forth. But for now, just know that the first step is getting cutters to not be called extraction. So as of this version of Boxcutter, we now support arrow keys, meaning that if you are drawing a circle, you can now press the arrow keys during the draw in order to adjust the amount of segments. In fact, actually it's shift arrow key. So let's pause it, and if we hold shift and press the arrow key, you can see that we're able to adjust our segments. Using our arrows, you can press left or right in order to decrement or increment the amount of segments, or even press up and down in order to deal with the amount of segments. This also extends to bevel, so if we were to draw a box and press B, during B you could press up and down in order to adjust the amount of segments. We could press escape, and let's just draw another box, and if we press V to array, you can now press up and down, left and right in order to adjust the amount of count that's inside of your array. So if you're a person using a Wacom or a Wacom remote, that should make things easier for you. This also extends a little bit further into shape cycling. So shape cycling is now able to be done on the arrow keys as well. So in order to do that, we need an interesting shape to recall. So we'll just cut that shape in, perform a cut with it, even though I didn't need that, and get rid of our selection here and select the right thing. Sometimes that happens, and we'll switch back over to box again and just perform another draw. Press Y, and if we draw a shape, we can now hold Alt and press the arrow keys left and right in order to cycle through the shapes, and you can see the shapes changing on the fly. And of course, once you recall a shape, you have the ability to use shift in order to get it to shift dimension 1-to-1 scale to its absolute proportions in order to get the shapes parity in there correctly. So just letting you know that we've done some work to expand on arrow key support inside of Boxcutter, so it should support most things. However, tab mode is a different beast of its own, so tab mode isn't fully supported by arrow keys at this time. But if you jump into any of the modals, you can use the arrow keys, of course, to make changes and modifications on the fly as of this update. One of the most crucial features of Boxcutter is shift to live, and last update we broke it. So I considered that an emergency situation we had to get rectified immediately. And what I mean by that is if you draw a shape and you hold shift, it's not supposed to actually snap to an arbitrary amount like you see it doing here. Normally you draw a shape, and if you hold shift when you click to apply, it'll keep the shape live, allowing you to get in and make modifications after the fact to your heart's content, depending on the type of shape that you're trying to create. So sometimes you actually need a very unique shape, in which case shift to live is there for you. In fact, here we are shift to living again, and it actually jumps down to a different level of extrude than the one that's desired, when really you should be able to extrude it wherever you want, hold shift, and then click to apply and shift the shape to live. And this was something that was a little bit annoying, and a couple of astute users pointed out to me, and that was definitely going to be the next thing that we aim to fix on this update. So just know that now, if you're using Boxcutter, you can now draw a shape and hold shift at any time and shift that shape to live. Use HardOps operations on it with no problem, just like you're supposed to and just like it's always been. So that's something that I apologize about leaving in a terrible state for so long, but I'm glad that we finally got back around and fixed shift to live, because shift to live is one of my favorite features of Boxcutter. So one of the things I hear a lot about is Inset. Why does Inset get slow? How do I run into issues with Inset? And more importantly, how do I get past issues with Inset? Well, the most important thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're using Purple Box, it does make a duplicate of the mesh and then solidifies it and then booleans it into the original mesh. So I've tabbed into edit mode and beveled this edge to just add a little bit of complexity. You know, we can also do the same to the back, just bevel that. And if we draw a box and we press I, we see that we're not able to get the most flexibility out of it. However, we are of course able to perform the inset operation. And that is of course the goal, but you do see that there's certain values in which things just don't work. So what I'm going to do is actually right click and cancel, and we're just going to draw a very small box right there. And we're going to go back in and draw a box, but we're going to press I to change to inset, and we're just going to press T, and we see that, you know, inset is still working. However, I could have sworn I saw a little bit of that area over there biting in, but maybe we have to actually move it over in order to see that inset plays off of the mesh that you give it. And this can result in some rather unsatisfactory inset activity happening. So let's shift this to live. And the easiest way for us to break this down is to press Q and just go through mod scroll, which involves us shift clicking this. So we could just roll the wheel. We see the first thing that happens is a solidify, which results in the mesh looking like this, which basically already breaks Boolean rules because this mesh is overlapping and is no longer manifold. If we roll the wheel again, we see that an intersect Boolean is performed on the solidification, which actually frees us of the burden of having to deal with that. But in a way, this is a rather rough inset. So let's right click cancel. We'll select both of these and delete it. Let's also bring back this shape, and we'll also delete that. And so what I want to do next is put a bunch of loop cuts in here. This is another case that can cause some confusion with the way the inset works. And I get a lot of people writing about, you know, why do I have issues with inset? Why is it slow? And it's because of the way that it works. It's important that users understand that when you use Purple Box, it is duplicating and solidifying your original mesh and then making it fit inside the boundary that you drew. And that's basically how all insets work in Blender at this time. So I'm going to draw another box, tab, you know, we'll just drag this dot to bevel it, press I to change to inset. Now we see another type of issue happening with inset, and we can press T and adjust the thickness, and we see that there's certain values that just won't work anymore because of the limitations of what we're facing. Of course, we have multiple Boolean algorithms now, so we could, you know, attempt to play with those settings. Let's do that. So we'll press Q, go under solidify. Solidify has the option of pressing 4 for something called non-manifold extrude, and we see that that's just not going to work for this, so that's not an option. We also have the option of going to the Boolean subpanel and changing this to use the exact solver, and that should, you know, basically allow us to be more precise and allow it to work without as much overhead. But we see that that's also not helping. In fact, if we shift click on mod scroll to begin scrolling through our process, we can see that this is our base shape. This is what is solidified to, which the solidification appears to not work out with the amount of geometric density that's being provided. So we scroll again and we see that it's being sliced out, and this is what we're giving, but we still have this area where it's overshot. So you in the audience, what feature will take care of this? Well, time's up. The answer is clean mesh. If we were to clean the mesh, we see that this mesh has been taken down to its bare essentials, the nittiest of grittiest, and that means that now we can press T, go into solidify, and things are able to behave to an extent. Of course, there's limitations to inset, which is just one of those things. I wish computationally we could detect the limit and just not allow users to get all the way there. But it's so random and variable that there are a large degree of things that must be taken into consideration with inset. But after you understand the rules and the foundations of how it's made, hopefully that should give a little bit of insight as far as how you can get the best out of using this. So here I am trying to inset this area that we just successfully inset, and we could accept defeat. In fact, suddenly I pause it and it gives me the result. How random. But let's try to actually catch it in a bad state like that one. So now we have this mesh. We can't even see it because it did not work out. We'll just press Q, shift scroll, and we see that this is what we're getting. We are getting this as our result. So it solidifies it, and you know, with solidify and dense geometry, if you have any experience with Blender, you know that those are recipes for disaster. And so it tries to do the intersect, but the intersect's not going to work due to Boolean malfunctioning is happening. And so, a lot of tools have been put in place to allow users to get in and troubleshoot and dissect this process. And I do aim to do more content talking about it in the future. But of course, the solution for this is we'll just click to leave it right here, just because, and we will just go to clean mesh. And so now that the mesh is clean, we can shift click on mod scroll toggle, which is on the way out, and bring back our final result. And now we can select this and actually press T and adjust the solidification. And of course, there's always going to be limits to this. There is no perfect inset, of course, because the underlying systems are using things in Blender that are still in the process of being refined and worked on and improved. And our tool definitely aims to be more of a Boolean awareness type thing, where we want to highlight some of the shortcomings and strengths of Booleans and optimize the ability to test and make them better. But I do look forward to what Blender has coming. In fact, the exact system offers quite a new array of possibilities that we're just beginning to scratch the surface on. But I wanted to do a small segment talking about how you can get the most out of Inset, how you can control it better, and just a little bit more about how Inset works behind the scenes.